Councillor Cleater observing.
Councillor Mackay.
Technical issues. Oh, that's better. There's no comments from. Yeah. Item 9. Are there any? What's that? Comments on the forward plan, or do the cabinet members wish to make any comments? No. I move that the forward plan be noted. Is that agreed? Item 10, to be introduced by Councillor English, the Cabinet Member for Environmental Services and Enforcement. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. The report on your agenda set out on pages 17 to 45 is an update on our environmental waste crime policy. It is going to all 3 packs because it crosses such a wide area of the council's work, a very important area. In many ways, this is a technical policy update because our existing policy framework has been overtaken by a number of changes, partly regulatory changes, which the report takes into account, but mostly because of the expansion of the council's role in animal welfare protection, which you will note if you compare the old report to the new report, there have been substantial additional amendments and additions to the policy framework to take into account how we deal with that particular very important area of the council's business. I do commend the report to members, but obviously if members of this committee have any questions or suggestions for improvement, we're always willing to take those on board because there is no such thing as a policy that can't be improved by engagement.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of comments, really. If we turn to page 26, page 26. Now, that's talking about when we take enforcement action, we aim to, and it obviously lists a number of bullet points. The only one which struck me is potentially missing, and it may be something you might want to consider, Clive, was there was no reference to the victim. So if we're talking about crime or environmental crimes, and there's always going to be a victim, and it doesn't seem to have any reference to that. It's talking about changing behaviours, what we may do with the culprit, if you like, but it didn't seem to be much reference to supporting the victim through what might have happened, and that really links in with on the next bit on item 5 was about obviously talking about enforcement and so on. And I just really wanted a bit of clarity, I suppose, about things like noise abatement enforcement, because one of the areas I'm getting the most questions or issues coming through from residents is around noise and antisocial behaviour from neighbours and so on. And I wasn't that clear as to the type of action we'd be looking at on that. And then my final point, because there's only 3 of them, was I noticed on page 35, we haven't in the legislative and regulatory reform listed out, is it the animal notices regulation 2023, which is referred to a couple of pages later. Yeah, so if you look on page 39, it's got about the animal penalty notices, regulations 2023. So when we're just in 4.2, that should just be added in just for consistency. I think it's a typing mistake and then it's not there.
I'd just like to ask the officer if she had an immediate response, and I'll come back on a couple of points later.
So with regard to the victim, we will always update the victim as to how action is being taken and what we are doing. Our enforcement role is due to the business or the perpetrator, for want of a better word, not the victim, but we will inform them of our actions and what we are doing and keep them updated at all times. With regard to the query around noise abatement, this isn't under this portfolio holder, that is in the other portfolio holder. This is where this policy is quite widespread. So unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that question in relation to noise abatement. And your last point in relation to the animal penalty, I will pick that up in terms of making sure that that is within that point within the document.
I think it's fair to say that the Cabinet and I think all members of the council are aware of that there are considerable problems with dealing with noise nuisances, and that we will be looking at how we deal with those going forward. But as my colleague says, that it is not quite within the purview of this particular policy, which is related specifically to waste crime. That we will be looking at a number of other areas of enforcement activity within the council, including environmental enforcement of other types, and of course the important issue of planning enforcement.
Thank you, Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for this report. There are very few real updates. It mainly does relate to the animal legislation when I compared the two, like Councillor English said, which does give me confidence that we haven't changed much. So we must have been controlling waste crime, community protection quite well before. Otherwise, there would have been a lot of alteration. So that is excellent. There are just a couple of I know you've changed it so that the numbering is correct, but the numbering has still gone a little bit awry. I'm kind of thinking of page 42. So we've got a 5.4.7, we've got a 5.4.8, we don't have a 5.4.9, and then we go to 5.4.10. And so I think if we do agree this, I just wonder whether we should agree it so that with an addition that the report authors can tidy up some of this numbering, because it also, sometimes it's just the paragraphs that have got numbers, like 5.4.3, and then sometimes we go into each individual paragraph has got a number. So one way or the other on that, and then sort out that missing number. But if we could just add that to the recommendation when we do it, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, of course, apologies about the numbering. I'm obviously missed number 9.
Thank you, then. Thank you for that. Anybody else wish to comment? Can we agree the report then, please? Thank you. Right, item 11. That's over to you. Adrian. Oh, we're doing swapping. And this is where you had the corrected paperwork. Thank you. Right, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. So this is the update on the first quarter of 24-25. It's obviously the finance performance. It reflects the services within this committee. Obviously, it reflects the new PAC structure as well. So, but obviously, that's what you've seen in the previous one when we've done the outturn reports, and I think the new. I think the key change that we've got to this particular report is it now doesn't include performance. So it was agreed back in the March packs that we would move to a dashboard system that you can access direct yourselves. The performance team are still developing that, but that will soon be available. They're going to come to the chairs and vice chairs to make sure they can access and feedback and so forth. Then it'll be accessible in the future. So that should give you hopefully more instant access to the performance data. In terms of the overall financial position, so for Maidstone as a whole, we're currently forecasting an overspend of about £354,000 to the end of the year. Obviously, within that, loads of unders and overs, as you would expect. For this particular committee, currently in a potentially overspend of £946,000 on the revenue budget. That's two items that we're currently looking at that are going to cause that. The first is Lock Meadow, which is about £400,000. This is mainly due to the vacant units down at Lock Meadow. There has been good some work on that, so we hope to have new tenants in by Q3. Heads of terms have been agreed. Obviously, final terms and conditions and all the financials are going through, but it's considered at the market rate at the moment for what we can get for such facilities. The other one is the development management income. So currently the number of planning applications this year has gone down quite a lot. So currently it looks like the income is going to be a lot lower in that area at the moment. Capital expenditure, again, potential underspend of about 4.2 million. The main slippage around that is to do with the infrastructure delivery. And obviously this is because there are currently no projects that we're planning to support at the moment. A lot of those come from other areas and that we will support them as we feel they are suitable for us to help contribute and they will add value to Maidstone. At the moment, there aren't any about that we feel that are any about at all. The actual report is for noting, but obviously happy to take any comments and obviously any questions as well.
Thank you, Councillor Russell.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the report. The Lock Meadow is going on for a little while, and I know we've got plans to get new tenants, but I am concerned that we just can't continue to let it go on forever if it's just losing money. So I wonder if there's any thoughts maybe as to when we might have a bigger review of that centre. The other thing is the development management. Is surely with the timeline of a local plan, you know, when you first get a local plan, everyone goes crazy and they like get all their planning applications in, exciting, and then when you get to the end of the local plan, it dwindles a little bit. So my question is really, is that what we're seeing, or is there something more to that? And then I've got a couple more points. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously the negative variance is against the forecast, the estimate. As you're alluding to, the new local plan review is a lot different to the previous one in that, off the top of my head, I think there were close to 70 sites. In the new local plan, if I can put it that way, there's a lot less. There are some very large sites, the garden settlements, 3 of them, but obviously they are sort of slow burners. So in simple terms, we're not comparing like with like.
Thank you. So I guess we just need to adjust that forecast going forward for a bit then. My other point was just disappointed really to see the UK SPF street lighting and greening programme is going to slip. I thought that was kind of a get on and do, and we're moving it back to 25-26. Similarly to the Moat Park kiosk refurbishment and extension, that went through planning probably about 6 months ago, and again it looks like we're going to slip the whole amount. We haven't, or correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen anything further on that. And then the new leisure centre, that was some of the preparatory money to get some of the initial reports done for the new leisure centre, and it looks like that's going to slip to 25-26. So I would just like a bit of a feel really from the cabinet member responsible for these about why all these 3 items are slipping and where we are with them. Thank you.
Sorry, can I quickly come back? You also talked about Lock Meadow, so I won't forget Lock Meadow. Jacqueline's on the call. I don't know if she knows more, but I know through the work they've done to try and fill the units, they've worked with the agencies in terms of trying to attract people and have to have thought about how they entice people in to make sure that the whole unit works as one. And I think they've been trying to do that. I think that's why they've been successful now in terms of getting people in. They're also looking at Love Food and how they manage that as well, and also to make sure that becomes more attractive and making sure that's set up in an appropriate way. So I think they've done that through that initial piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Greenman.
Sorry, my other points were for the cabinet member about the Moat Park kiosk, the leisure centre and the lighting green. Why they're slipping and where we are with those.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I'm not aware of particular administrative delays. I'm aware of the 3 programmes that you refer to. I know that the kiosk is being the layout of the kiosk is being revisited. I know that that is in train. We have looked at the lighting programme and we like the principle that it's being upgraded. We're looking at the details of that, but I'm not aware that that review process is introducing any new delay to this. So I don't yet share Councillor Russell's concerns about a delay, but her question is valid. So I don't know if officers can assist with that. Thank you.
Sorry, just to say on the kiosk, certainly by the end of the year, the plan is to spend it. It may be slower than you originally thought, but this year it's certainly going to be spent. So from a finance perspective, I'm sort of comfortable. Just in terms of the leisure centre, I know the spend may have slowly not have happened yet, but I know we've engaged some of the market informally. So I've because part of my role is looking after procurement as well. So I know they've engaged with Katie and the property team to make sure that we've started to think about how and when. So they've gone to do some site visits elsewhere and numerous other things. So I know in the background it's happening, although the actual spend may not have happened yet. So it's definitely on their radar and they're thinking about it.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, I also wanted to just ask about Lock Meadow, and I do have to say, I went on Saturday, the 3rd of August, with a group of teenagers, and the atmosphere was absolutely dire. There were very few food stalls open. There was nothing really on offer for them. We stayed and had lunch, but I think we really need to focus on getting people in there. I was going to ask, the Lock Meadow, does that include the market hall? Or is that a separate entity?
But I'll go away and check and double check that,
Okay.
but I don't think it does.
And the other question I was asked about Lock Meadow is, do we hire for the outdoor area when it's used? For example, River Festival, Thai Festival, do we actually charge anything for using that outdoor space?
Yes, as far as I know we've had discussions internally about some changes going on and how we make better use of that. Certainly, when Maidstone has its own events, we use the hard piece out the back for events and so forth. So we do try and use that to attract people in and we use it ourselves for functions.
Okay.
Adrian, sorry, I'm sorry, but can I just interject here? This is Jacqueline Tolhurst, just with regards to Lock Meadow. With regards to the outdoor space, there is no charge in the respect of hiring the outdoor space currently, but it's something that we're looking at with regards to the whole area. And just on your point in respect of the length of time, Councillor Russell, that this is all taken, we did review the issues with Lock Meadow quite a few months ago and appointed a new agent, which is who's worked hard to be able to get the bigger units, which were formerly the Feathers unit and the Frankie and Benny's unit, under offer. And we've got heads of terms agreed, and that's in solicitors' hands. And we're hoping for completion so that we should be looking at a change of income in Q3.
Thank you for that. The voice from the beyond.
Apologies, I couldn't be there in person.
So there's a couple of other questions. The Innovation Centre, the 150,000, what was that spent on? Do we know?
Right. So the Innovation Centre is looking at how it changes some of its what facilities it's got in particularly can't substitute, but looking at wet rooms. So that's to encourage other medical functions in, so it gives you better functionality there. So that's what they're looking to invest in, and so that's part of the cost of trying to get the wet rooms and some, and also the parking near the Innovation Centre as well. So that's what the whole budget is designed to do.
And so just the last point, it was just following up from what Councillor Russ said about the street lighting. I have actually received complaints from residents regarding the street lighting in the town centre, where street lights have now failed. So it would be nice just to know how long it's going to take to look at the street lighting programme to get those replaced.
I don't know that details, but I have to go away and speak to the project lead and get your details on that that project, and so we can feed back to you. Oh, it's slightly different.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. There's some interesting things in this report, and there's some interesting things not in this report. The performance indicators, we're now 4 months into the local election. We don't have any performance indicators before us, and I see there is a reference in the text that work is still ongoing. Well, given that we're now into our second cycle after the elections, you know, if work's still going to be ongoing, are we going to be waiting until we're setting at the next set round of meetings, we'll be looking at next year's budget? Well, one of the things you set a budget in light of is how your performance is doing and your performance indicator information, which we've not had. So, you know, I think that delay, to be honest, isn't really acceptable. And I know it says the development of the dashboard is currently underway. Well, you know, the budget we're working to was set in April, or finally agreed rather in February 2014. And we're now in September 2014, almost halfway through the financial year, and we don't have any performance indicators to actually measure how we're performing. So I think that's very poor, to be honest. And it means it's very difficult to look at some of the financial information. We're losing the context we need for it. So, for instance, the points raised around things like Lock Meadow and the planning application fees, they could be both indicative of a downturn in the economy, you know, the fact that year on year, Lock Meadow seems to be performing below budget. And as I say, the next cycle, we'll be setting the budget or very soon for the following financial year. So is the fact that Lock Meadow always seems to be struggling against its targets something, for instance, we should be looking at? But as I say, in a way, without key performance indicators, you don't have the context for it. And again, potentially with development control, I note what Rob was saying, that the number of applications coming through is going to be low because the local plan relies on those 3 big developments at Lidsing, Heathlands and at the barracks site. But is that going to be then reflected in, if you like, next year's budget? So will you revise down the income in those areas? Because if you don't, if we're not careful, we're just going to go into a new budget underachieving. I mean, the fact that we're £1 million adrift after only 3 months is something rather of concern. And it was interesting that the chair of Healthier Communities referred to some of the delays in terms of the capital programme as not being down to officers, but effectively being down to political delays. It's a few months since we had a meeting on the town centre street lighting, which I think Stephen and Tony were both at, and we agreed at that point it was a multi-party thing, how we should be looking to take that money forward, because the officers for the last year and a half have been telling us that if we don't get the money spent soon, we're going to lose it because of the pot it was given to us. Now, if we can now just delay it, for another financial year, that just doesn't seem to tally up with what we've been told for the last 2 years about that type of expenditure. And then my final point, picking up the question around the leisure centre, there just doesn't seem to be any progress. We don't, as a council, seem to be moving forward on looking at what we're going to be doing with the leisure centre. The fact that any reports which we may need to commission, and we've commissioned over the last few years quite a lot of reports, yet if we're going to start the process again, when are we going to start to commission these reports? Because we did, and it's still council policy, to have the replacement facility or whatever we do in place by 2031. And to achieve that, decisions needed to be made in this current financial year. Well, if you're only planning to spend the money not in this year, but in subsequent years, you're clearly not going to be on target to actually deliver through to current council policy. So at what point are we going to be told there's a change of council policy, and either we're not going to do anything at Moat Park Leisure Centre, or it's going to be pushed further into the future? At some point, you've got to come clean with not only this committee, but with the public of Maidstone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to step in relation to the forecast variance under development management majors and minors, because it's clearly majors. I think my concern, and it reflects something that Councillor Harper said, is why did we forecast so much income when, one, the parameters have changed? And I think we need to, going forward, we need to revisit how those forecasts are arrived at, because if we have got a different spatial strategy, which is moving from the 70 dispersed sites to 3 sites, we're clearly not going to have the level of income that's being talked about. It will be lumpy, to say the least, and it will be less. So and this is where I totally agree with Councillor Harper, we're setting ourselves up to fail. So I think financially, we need to look at that and get a realistic figure in there. Because one of the reasons I'm concerned about this is that development management are the kind of heroes of this council. They do the really gritty work out there, making sure that development is what is supposed to be when we agreed it, and that local people are not negatively impacted, and that takes an awful lot of work through enforcement, through checking and making sure the legal agreements and everything is right. And that's the other point I wanted to touch upon, and it will be touched upon later on when we're talking about the MPPF consultation. But currently, the way that planning fees work is inherently unfair. What we are seeing, and we all know it from our wards, is that we see a significant planning application approved, And then there's death by 1,000 cuts, and it's chipped away at with changes and amendments to that application to what it actually arrives is very often not what local people are expecting. And a lot of that comes about basically at the council's expense, because Section 73 applications, and the way that can be a huge amount of work that we cannot not do as a council, but essentially we're subsidising developers in doing it. And I think it needs to be said loud and clear that hopefully government has kind of woken up to this, and it's, I think, question 92 in the NPPF consultation. So I hope everyone writes in and says that we're being done on this. But I don't know, Mr. Jarman, if you want to come in just to talk about the implications that are coming from it, because I think if we're moving, especially to really big planning applications, we could have some really big Section 73 implications.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for allowing me to chip in. Yeah, I'd say Section 73 applications, which are to vary conditions, have become increasingly popular. And from the 1st of April to last Thursday, we already had 32 of these variation of condition, Section 73, minor material amendment applications. They all relate to the same thing. As Councillor Harwood said, the application fee is a grand total of £293. So to illustrate my point, I'm sure a lot of councillors, I'm looking at them now, can remember when we planning committee permitted the redevelopment of the old Peugeot garage, the Roots garage. So the total number of residential units was something like 150, something like that. So there was a large planning fee. So if you're worried about solely finance, kind of like happy days. As nearly always happens in the urban area, particularly with the way we've signalled it, it was accompanied by a viability assessment, which said we can't provide any affordable housing, not even off-site. There's no margins to provide any open space, either on-site or off-site. And it was, to be blunt about it, it was quite a sad list. So I think planning committee sort of stamped certain values on it. Like they wanted to see the original Criddle windows replaced with modern day equivalents, opening up the River Len, etc., etc. So as is the pattern in, well, I'd say with all developments, but particularly in the town centre, after the developer got planning permission, lo and behold, they come in with a planning application to vary condition 2. Condition 2 says something like the development shall be carried out, the 150 residential units shall be carried out in accordance with drawings 1, 2 and 3. So for £293, they vary those drawings, and the courts have found that you can actually increase the number of units because it's regarded as proportional. So for £293, they put in a planning application, which I think was determined by planning committee after about 12 months of very hard negotiations, which was then subject to a Section 106 agreement, which is yet to be signed. So for 18 months and counting work, it was 293 quid for the developers. And that was an increase because it went up in December. So like Councillor Harwood said, there is just no alignment between the amount of work and planning fees. I mean, another classic example in a fairly historic borough like Maidstone is listed building consents. We have about 200 a year. It costs nothing. So you are literally, we are subsidising the house building industry. Sorry.
I shall try and pick up some of your other points, Councillor Halper. So in terms of the forecast, as already been mentioned, we're definitely going to pick up the overs and unders, make sure we build those into the budget as we always do. I think it's one of the things we do need to remember is how early we set the budget to some degree, and so therefore some of the assumptions. So I think at the time when we set this budget, we were hoping the local plan would be going through quite quickly and everything else. And obviously since then we know that's been very different. So sadly, it's always we make the best assumptions we can at the time. So but we'll definitely reflect those in the budget and part of the conversations going forward. In terms of the performance indicators, I'll take that back to the team and just find out exactly when it's coming out. So I'll give you a bit more detail. I know I've seen some internally so I know they're done, but obviously access to them I'll ask how we can do that, because I know they definitely want to report to committee formally every quarter at least. So they'll certainly be coming soon. So hopefully that will give you a little bit more confidence on that. But I'll confirm exactly what those dates are. In terms of your other comments about the lighting and the leisure, because they're part of the capital programme, I'll make sure the commentary is a little bit more detailed to give you a bit more information on that, so you have an idea of timings and so forth, so we can bring back that information for you.
Thank you. Councillor Harper, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, Councillor Howard, that was very interesting, that discussion we've just had, and Rob, in terms of the planning fees, because I do think we're going to need to do quite a lot of thinking in terms of the medium financial strategy with it, because if we're obviously with those big free developments, I mean, there's reports about it later on the agenda, but I would imagine that the point at which they start putting planning applications in is a couple of years. Well, I don't know, it's difficult to know, isn't it? But it's probably a couple of years away. In which case it may be, if you like, for the next, I don't know, the rest of this year and then the next year and possibly the year after that, it might be relatively fallow for us in terms of applications coming through. But then if you like, the year after, we could suddenly get significant application money coming in if we suddenly get Lenham Heath, Lidsing and the Barracks coming through. But we could have a bit of a problem. And I know we have relied on development control income over the last few years. It's one of our larger areas of income in the council budget. So I think the implications of it need to be given real consideration as to how we factor it through in the medium financial strategy. Thank you.
Councillor Keeley.
Thank you. Just picking up on something that Councillor Greenan just said about the Thai festival, the Lockmeadow thing. I stumbled on it by chance. I was actually looking for Shaun the Sheeps and I thought, oh, what's this? And I put a picture on Facebook. I know Facebook is not the be all and all of the comms world, but the number of people that didn't know it was on, and I sat there trying to find it, and I didn't know I had to look on Maidstone River Park. So I didn't know about Maidstone River Park. I'm guessing a lot of the residents didn't know they had to do that either. So I just wonder if going back, several points about, getting Lockmeadow filled and more things and more vibrant, because you said there weren't a lot of people at the thing you went to, and there was the Thai thing was building up when I went, the Thai Fest. So it looked really good, but I had to go. But I'm just wondering if there's a comms aspect to this information is not getting out to everybody. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In response to Councillor Harper's points earlier, I don't mind his pointed questions. I shall try to give straightforward answers. On the point about the alleged delay in the lighting, I wasn't at the meeting that he referred to earlier in the year, but I was informed about it and have been kept up to speed on what happened since. We have had a very brief review of the information. As you can see in the headings, it talks about the street lighting and greening programme. We had a serious but small scale concern about how much what the impact of the light levels would be, and we've asked for an urgent update on that technical information, so that in the necessary and very important business of community safety, of putting in lights and replacing lights of an appropriate standard, that in that good work, we don't undo the good work that we want to do in terms of biodiversity protections. So we've asked a brief question about that. Councillor Harper, we are as exercised as you are about meeting the budget targets and the spending dates and meeting those targets. That was foremost in our discussion as well. So you need not be concerned on that account. As for your point about the leisure centre spending, I think again, you're a little bit ahead of where we are in this budget report. You're asking about the planning for the future of the leisure centre. I made my views clear about that when we had the debate in full council recently about this. This is talking about the current spending, the £2.5 million that much money has been spent on the upgraded wet services at the leisure centre, and the remaining funds that haven't been spent for that are for planned works in that £2.5 million programme that are programmed to be completed to keep the standard of service at the leisure centre as we would hope it to be. I've already taken on board his points about planning forwards. I'm as keen as he is to see the maintenance of excellent swimming provision in Maidstone, and he need not to be concerned about that. Thank you.
Sorry, just as a postscript to Councillor Thompson's point, on the lighting strategy, the fundamental element of the lighting strategy, and that which we've received close to £600,000 in funding, is the total rewiring of the system. And that is all on schedule. As far as I understand, it was signed on, so the work is ongoing. The point I think that Councillor Thompson made was that was around policy, and the policy, i.e. what kind of lighting it is, i.e. the hours of operation, whether it is motion sensor and so on, that's all in the policy, which is running parallel to the actual works of putting wires back into the ground. So certainly from the briefing that we had last week, that there is no delay in the capital works, if you like. That's all signed off, agreed, and going through. I think the point around the safeguards and so on, that is in terms of the supporting policy document, which is under development and has no impact on the speed that the work is actually done and the money is spent from government. And certainly we are in no danger of missing the funding boat. It's in the pipeline, literally.
Thank you, yeah, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. I wonder if I might have got some confused with the description we've got here, because yeah, I mean, there was a big street lighting being looked at a couple of years ago. I mean, Tony, remember when we went to a meeting over in the library and sat there for about 4 hours where they showed us almost every single street light in the town centre. But there was also the money, and I don't know if it's the same pot, when we were talking about sort of the greening, and we were talking about the Jubilee Square and Remembrance Square and stuff to do with planters. So I mean, I'm not sure if they're the same, if they're both covered by that, or if they're sort of different things which will come along at different times. I suppose it was the thing about the planters in Jubilee Square and Remembrance Square. I was sort of thinking, is that being delayed or quite where we are?
Through you, Chairman. We were all involved. You were involved, weren't you, Councillor Harper, in the meeting where essentially John Edwards was going out and he was scoping it and the extension of the soft landscaped area out the front of the town hall and so on. That work is all going ahead and is on time. I'm starting to kind of, I think the reason it's not being flagged here is it comes under a different policy advisory committee potentially, and there'll be more detail when Councillor English is there. But I have not been told anything different than we were all told when we were together, that the money is in and we are consolidating rather than scattering the works across the town. We are doing the high street as the main centrepiece, so we get more bang for our bucks.
Right, thank you. Oh, Councillor Russell.
I must just be going balmy then, because on page 56, we've got UK SPF street lighting and greening programme. We've got a carry forward of an unused budget from 23-24 of 250,000. We've got an adjusted estimate. We've got the budget remaining of 250,000, and then we've got the projected slippage to 2025-26. So whatever that is not on schedule. Thank you.
Did any of the officers want to come back or?
I suppose I just reiterate that we've sort of taken that as an action to go away and provide a little bit more detail in the next report. So we'll do that for that and the leisure centre and all the other ones sort of mentioned to hopefully give a little bit more detail for you.
Thank you. Thank you for that discussion. This report is for noting. Is that okay with anyone? Do we agree just to note it? Thank you. Item 12, response to the National Planning Policy Framework and Planning System scheme, and that is Councillor Harwood.
Yep, thank you. I'll be very brief on this. We're all aware that the incoming new government have hit the ground running in terms of wanting to review the National Planning Policy Framework. The consultation questionnaire has 106 questions. I had the misfortune of responding in my own right and having to go through the lot of them, and they do become a bit grim, but it did give me an opportunity to moan about section 73. So it was worth it in the end. I got there in the end. A lot of the changes relate to greenbelt issues, which of course, except for a sliver of Nettlestead, don't really affect us in an obvious way, but they do affect us in that we're just the other side of it, and therefore we tend to get a lot of the development that doesn't end up in Sevenoaks and Tunbridge and Moorling and Tunbridge Wells and so on. So I think, you know, there may be collateral impacts that we need to be concerned about. I think probably at that point it's worth passing over to the officers so that they can perhaps outline their proposed response that they have put together, which I think all of us will be hopefully feeding into in some way. Oh.
I'll come into this one if that's all right. Thank you to Councillor Harwood. So yes, as Councillor Harwood said, there's quite a lot of questions, so quite a lot of answers. So I'll strategically take through some of the highlights, but then if there are any specific questions, obviously we can work on those. So going through what we're sort of objecting to, you'll see there's a revision to the presumption in favour of sustainable development, so we've objected to that. Also objecting to the reintroduction of 5-year housing land supply. Previously, the previous NPPF gave local authorities that had an up-to-date local plan, such as us who'd adopted a plan, a sort of we didn't have to apply that while the plan was in place for the 5 years, those 5 years, but that's been reintroduced. So also we're objecting to the new calculation on housing need. So there's a new method in the report. It highlights that basically using the new method of housing figure would increase. So it's presently set at 1157 in the local plan, but when the local plan goes out of date, that would go up to 1344 at the present time. But obviously that new method is revised every year based on the standard method calculation. So that's that one. Obviously we've talked about the introduction of a new grey belt system, so we've raised concerns with that and needing further explanation. We've also talk about in the responses around concerns, the viability, concerns around the green belt and the new standard benchmarking approach. Also, the report suggests reforms to compulsory purchase powers, and we support that. It talks about changing affordable housing definition, removing 10% small sites, and also talking about starter homes removal of the starter homes. And then we're also talking about changes to definitions around the economy, which in certain respects we're supporting. So this is around future economy, so gigafactories, laboratories, etc., which there is some support, but further detail is needed. We've talked about planning fees, so the idea of localization of planning fees, which we've suggested we support that due to previous discussions. And then there's also some transitional arrangements and things around infrastructure, and we've suggested there are elements around needing the policy need to be more robust so that we can deliver infrastructure up front rather than on the back of development. Sorry, that was a whistle-stop tour, but happy to go into more detail on specific questions.
Thank you. Councillor Russell first.
Thank you, Chair.
Russell.
Sorry? Cool. Sorry. Who did you ask, me or Claudine?
You go.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, this is a massive report, isn't it? And the government seems to be wishing to rush the whole process through because they went out to, was it consultation starting on the 30th of July and finishing on the 24th of September. So basically during the holiday season. And I mean, I think as we all know, when you do a consultation basically in the holiday season, you're not really planning to take much notice of probably what comes back, because you would have been doing it through into the autumn. I mean, the government's got 5 years in power at least, and I'm not sure quite what the massive rush is to get this through when it's such a significant change to where we are now. And the current, I mean, if we think about the National Planning Policy Framework, that was set up in 2010 when there was a change of government then. And I can't remember quite how long it took to bring in, but I think it was probably considerably longer than a couple of months after an election. So I've got really significant concerns on that, which are probably of a detail there's not much point as a council responding to. But to be honest, the thing is a travesty from I think from this council's perspective. We're going to be required to build more housing than we have already planned for. And we only have to think, I mean, the local election campaign, which we've all been through over the early part of this year, one of the big policies or the big issues on the doorstep, wherever you were in Maidstone, was house building, and a continual erosion of, the edge of the town and the countryside and so on. And I know we've all got slightly different views in terms of some of the approach, but it was the biggest concern, I think, of our residents. And the fact that we're now, as a result of this, going to have to do even more housing on top of what we've already planned for. So, we're going to have to do something probably almost the size of Heathlands on top of, what we're pushing through over the next few years. And I just think it's appalling. And it comes partly, doesn't it, from what I can see on this in terms of this, it's a chapter 4, isn't it? It's a new standard method for assessing housing needs. Where at the moment we've got the housing needs assessment, which is looking at your population projections, looking at the number of factors, and then that then produces a figure, which is the one we've got in our local plan and we've had in local plans for a number of years. Whereas that whole idea has been scrapped, and actually rather than assessing what you need, it's going to be on how many buildings there are in the borough. But now, and if you've got 10 buildings, you've got to build another 10 houses or whatever, and you've got 100, 10,000, you've got to build X thousand on top. Well, that doesn't relate to any form of need. And I think it's right that we really are strong on this and pointing out that this is an absurd way to assess the requirements necessary, because it then links through on things like median workplace. Question 16, isn't it? Is the workplace-based median house price? And then they're talking about having adjustments in terms of you know, how your standard baseline. Well, the fact is that we have large commuting in this borough. So just under 10% of our population work outside of Maidstone. And I can remember from economic development in the past that, and it's sort of implied here, is that the people who live in the borough tend to be wealthier than the people who work in the borough. It's a bit of a generalisation, but it's a fact that a lot of people in Maidstone travel up to London or out to Medway or Tunbridge Wells for work, for high paid work, and is necessarily always available locally. So I think the fact of changing stuff there, and then you sort of look through in, again, it's referred to, I think, in paragraph 3.7 of the covering report, talking about adjusting, the baseline stock figure will be adjusted upwards in areas where house prices are more than 4 times higher than earnings. Well, that seems to me to be saying if you live in an affluent area, you've got to have even more housing than if you lived in more of a depressed area. Well, I would have thought to some extent, if you're living in a more depressed area, that's where you actually need more investment, and that may be where you need to put potentially your development and your housing, rather than in affluent areas where you're over hyping and, you know, moving away from the whole idea of spreading out wealth across the country. So this seems to be suggesting that we're going to be hitting areas which are relatively wealthy with even more housing. And it makes me wonder, is the idea, when you look through some of the rest of the stuff, to actually depress the value of housing? So that we're going to have a big increase in the number of houses built, say, for instance, in Maidstone. The demand for it is not necessarily going to be increasing because, you know, we know how many we need. So there's just more houses available. Presumably the price goes down, and anybody who owns a property is actually going to find their main asset potentially going down in value as one of the knock-on results of this type of approach. And again, you know, the reference to the requirements in terms of affordable housing, some of the stuff dropping out of this fiasco, it's just concerning. I do think it's going to make our housing affordable home policy and our wish to get more social housing more difficult than it currently is. And I just think the public in the borough are going to be appalled at this. I think there's a really good response we're coming up with. And I think if anything, perhaps, and I know it's difficult, because obviously we've got to give a factual and sort of objective response. But I would encourage perhaps the cabinet member to look at tightening up some of the concerns we're expressing here, because I think everybody, you know, in the council probably shares a lot of those concerns, and I think we just need to, you know, really hammer it as hard as we can, and try to make sure that perhaps some of our neighbouring authorities are doing the same, because we need, you know, big. It's just really upsetting when you read something like this. Reading it today, it was worse than what I thought when I saw the headlines figure of just over that 1,300 houses a year. It just goes from bad to worse.
We've got quite a number of speakers, but I'll take Councillor Harwood first.
Yeah, if I may come straight back on that, Councillor Harper. Yeah, I think everybody agrees. Somewhere like Maidstone has so many constraints in terms of its water stressed, and we haven't got the water. We've got so many protected areas for various reasons, whether that be the Kent Downs or whether that be the flood zones and so on. We've got huge challenges, and the new calculation that's being talked about is essentially kind of exponential growth on top of what you've got, and is totally unsustainable. However, hidden within the document, there are similar challenges for urban areas with a relaxation of the way the development goes on there. And frankly, we know where that's got us. So, you know, there's been the permitted development changes with office conversions and so on without the social and green space and other infrastructure that those new residents need has led us into some very challenging territory. The way that we believe we can raise this is perhaps not through the very technical questionnaire which comes with the consultation. It is through an open letter to the minister, giving some real life examples and reasons why these planning changes will amplify the problems we already have in a provincial town, and making it an open letter, I think that's where we can go really be very tough. And I don't know if one of the officers want to come back on this in terms of a timetable for it, but certainly coming out of our earlier discussions, essentially the two going together, that we have the hard-hitting tough letter giving the real-time examples of why this is not working and how this will make things significantly more difficult. So I don't know. Karen, do you want to come in maybe?
Yeah, I'll just come back briefly. Obviously, the timescale for the consultation itself is the 24th of September for consultation response, which is obviously the questionnaire information. But we can quite happily be working with Tony and getting your feedback into that letter to, as Tony says, put forward a more hard-hitting response with a bit more detail to it to go alongside that piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Wow, the new government certainly hit the ground running, haven't they? And as has been said, the new targets are not going to be good for our borough in any way, shape or form. Particularly as well, I didn't like the fact that not much credence was given to an authority that has a local plan, has reviewed a local plan. We've been on the wheel, we've been a good local authority, we've been abiding by all policy, and yet we've still been hit by it. And I think that is really disappointing for us to see as councillors, but more importantly for all of the residents that we represent, because it was a major election thing that just came up and came up and came up, and that is what our residents are really concerned about. So very disappointed on that. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in this. I think there's a lot of good in it. I'm really happy with the responses from chapter 3, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 8. I can't agree with the responses in chapter 4 or 5. I would also make a point that yes, we don't have much greenbelt in the borough, but really disappointing. I'm going to be parochial for one moment that Nettlestead didn't even get a mention, didn't even put the name of it in there, which is where our tiny bit of greenbelt is. I think also this response in general for me was lacking data. When we did the response to the closure of the children's centre, we pulled on a great amount of data. We sent that forward, and I think that really helped individual councillors, I know I did, use that data as a basis to then do our own personal responses. I do want to do my own personal response. Closure date's the 24th of September. I haven't done it yet, and I was sort of hoping that I'd be able to pull on some data strands that came from this. There's a bit in chapter 8, but that's the only place I could find it. So I thought that we could have pulled particularly the data on, house prices and what that affects the hours travel time out of London, because we were saying we've got 10% of our residents work in London, and that does really pull and skew all of our figures. And I don't know about you guys, but a lot of house building in my ward, and I've not noticed one price going down. So I really don't think this is going to achieve the aims that it's set out to until we maybe ruin everything. So moving now in detail to chapter 4, I find the devil is in the detail here with a lot of this stuff, is always the way. On page 81, NBC would like to see the government try to further control the rental market. Ooh, I mean, how? No detail. That is a big sentence and it's been put in there in the wrong font, I think. It's even got a comma at the end, yeah, I mean, I can't really agree to a sentence like that without knowing what that's trying to do. On page 82, we've got the surveying of the brownfield sites. A lot of election promises were made that we're brownfield first. Now, I would hope that we are still brownfield first, and I get the feel of this, but I think we need clarity on that point. And my worry is that we don't actually have very much brownfield in the borough at all, as per my question to full council recently. So I'm hoping this isn't just a vanity thing for the barracks site. So I'm worried about that. Question 24, we're suggesting that the permitted development rights under class Q of the general permitted development order, which allows the conversion of agricultural buildings no longer in use, key point, into residential properties is reconsidered. Ooh, okay. I think we're trying to kill farming there. I mean, surely if you had a farming use for it, you would do that. If you no longer have a farming use for it, what is wrong with looking at other uses? As a farmer, can't go with that. On page 86, we're going on the ecological value of land, which is key development. That's fine. Arbitrary decisions, yeah, fine. We've got a spelling mistake on 14, cognizant, yeah. And then we are going on to 92. We're into now compulsory purchase. Meanwhile, landowners are often more focused on selling and developing their land for profit rather than for public benefits. Whilst that may sometimes come into it, I mean, obviously we live in a capital system. I'm just concerned that we would even write that in a response that's going off to central, and I cannot get on board with that. Beauty, subjective, well designed, also subjective. I think that needs clarification, maybe not as subjective in well designed, but we do need to know what that is, because without, you know, further meaning, it's just going to end up the same way. So I think overall, these are my issues, and I just wonder if there would be some way we could work together on chapters 4 and 5. The rest I can totally get on board with. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The point that was made earlier about we've delivered a lot of housing, and that's put these numbers higher because of that. I remember back in, it must have been about 15 years ago, talking to the leader of Maidstone Borough Council at the time, when the government was looking at indicative numbers for Gravesham at around 8,000 and Maidstone at 8,000, and Gravesham were balking at the idea and saying that they just could not deliver 8,000. Maidstone, on the other hand, actually increased the number beyond what the government was looking for, because they were going after growth point funding, which would bring a large amount of infrastructure along with the housing. And I think that if you look at the trajectory of Gravesham and Maidstone in the intervening years, you'll see that by turbocharging those numbers at that point, we really have paid the price down the line. So the idea that by delivering more in this plan leaves us with more in the future, I think that's already with us, and it's been with us for a good 15 plus years. I think one of the things about this consultation makes very clear is the fact that there's quite an arbitrary view of brownfield sites and grey belt. I've spoken with Councillor Harwood about sorry, getting you two mixed up, about the fact that really this is a land that's previously been used might have a small shed in it, and it might be 2 acres, and it might well be that that's one of the richest environments for wildlife corridors. It might link to protected environments, but it just happens to be something that's considered grey belt. I think we should be looking at what we're dealing with in terms of fields, land, rather than these sort of arbitrary designations. And things like grey belt, you might end up with a piece of grey belt which everyone agrees is not especially contributing to wildlife, and it may not be of great significance, maybe a former arable field, but it may have no infrastructure whatsoever around it. So do we then make that our priority for development, when in actual fact it might be one of the more unsustainable areas? I think we really do need to think in the next year or so and going forward, we need to think about how we protect our valued landscapes in this council. We need to think about policy, ways and approaches. I've seen planning permission where I see the council uses neighbourhood plans, character assessment documents like the Lewes Road character assessment, landscape and local value. It all adds material to where we feel a development may be harmful, and I think that looking at what's coming down the line, we really do need to get our policies in order, so we've actually got some hooks to make sure we get what we actually want in the borough. And I'm going to end with this point that Councillor Councillor Harwood mentioned earlier about permitted development in the town centre. We really have been hammered as a town, and we we see the numbers being met in one way, shape or form, but we see just how much it cripples us. And I think that I've went through all these questions. I've seen the response. I've seen comments from Councillor Harwood, and I've made my own, and it's absolutely grueling. I was in a parish council meeting on Monday talking about the sorts of responses that can be given, and many people weren't there because it's holiday season, and they looked at it and just thought, wow, you know, it's going to be so difficult for us as a parish to submit anything. So I've said to them, just think about the things that are most important to you. You don't necessarily have to give 106 responses, but do pick out the ones that are going to make the biggest impact to the parish, because ultimately, if we let permitted development go forward, and you look at how things have been impacted in the town centre, we're going to get a lot more development, and we're not going to get any more infrastructure. And that's the thing that most people say. We can take the housing, but what's going on with roads, hospitals, education? And that's the thing we've really missed out on. We've protected 14 of our best office blocks. I really think that we should be giving a strong message to the government that we need to do more to collect from developers. They're making out like bandits with their £295 for 18 months worth of work. If they're going to get the development, we really do need them to pay for things that we value.
Councillor Spooner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Over many years, I've always looked forward to reading government's proposals to modernise, streamline, make the planning system faster, fairer. And I've never, ever failed to be disappointed by what comes out. And this, I think, is probably the worst one I've ever seen. It's obviously been coupled together in great haste within about 1 month of them coming into power. Very limited amount of time for consultation. It is ham-fisted, it is coupled together. It shows absolutely no insight as to how the planning system actually works. And that is what I find absolutely excruciating. And we are supposed to comment on it. There's precious in there that I personally agree with. I think the officers have done an excellent job in going through it, and I agree with nearly all the comments that they have made. I won't go through detail by detail, but two particular issues that really annoy me is firstly this concept of grey belt land. It's a complete and utter nonsense. It's called green belt, not because it's green, but because it maintains openness and it maintains the separation of villages and towns and small rural areas. To use this concept of grey means people are going to come forward and say, well, we've got this huge car park. We've got this huge area which the local gypsy community has concreted over. It's grey belt, you know, and that is what's going to happen. For years and years and years, developers have tried to get permission in the green belt by saying, oh, but our site doesn't make any contribution. Well, it does. It all does. But there we are. That's fortunately, we've only got a tiny bit of green belt, so that's not going to apply too much to Maidstone Borough. The other issue that really upsets me is the calculations for housing need. And it seems to me, Maidstone Borough, along with probably many other borough councils, has been very responsible. It has upset people. It has created controversy by actually providing and allocating the amount of housing that the government has asked us to provide. We have done that at political cost. We have done that over the years. And now we are being penalised for it, because the more you provide, the more you're now being asked to provide. And I think we need to go to government in the strongest possible terms and saying, what is the point of us spending hundreds of thousands of pounds doing a local plan, providing all the land for housing which you've asked us to do, and then you thank us by saying, oh, well, you can provide a bit more. I mean, I find it absolutely excruciating. Sorry, I've had my rant. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Yes, if you want to.
Just to come back on Councillor Spooner's point, I think you've hit the nail on the head, that clearly this is a development industry lobbyist wish list that has become a consultation on the future of the planning process in England. And I think that's why it's so simple, and that's why it picks off all those economic issues, because I think it chimes with economic growth being driven by development, and essentially the way that we do that being very driven very much by lobbyists on behalf of the development industry. But we're confronted with what we're confronted with, and we will frame those responses. And I just want to thank everybody, because I thought it was a really good debate and it brought up some really good points. And I know I'll be feeding in further to the officers, and hopefully all your points will feed in too. And the end product and the covering open letter, I hope it will cover everything with the strength that it needs to. You know, where I think we also need to think about the way that we use that open letter, because I think there's a political side to this, which we need to, you know, to speak to our colleagues on the council who have contacts in the Labour Party and so on, because otherwise Maidstone Borough and its residents are going to pay a price for a very long time. And because essentially that exponential growth we talked about, this will snowball. And you know, how can we have a sustainable future for the borough with a level of growth which is clearly unsustainable?
Councillor Harper. Just wanted to, I really welcome the idea of that current letter. I think that's the real ability for us to really say the hard hitting stuff which is probably needed, because this has to be a factual answer to the questions. A couple of points which Brian raised, I just wanted to elaborate on. It was actually in paragraph 413. This is about 50% affordable housing on green belt sites. Now, you know, on the face of it, 50% affordable housing is a good idea if you can get it in places. On Greenfield, on the green belt, which is the periphery outside of the existing built-up part of cities and towns, if that's where you're going to aim to put your affordable housing, and the people who need affordable housing will tend to be lower paid people, to put them on the fringes of a town is the actual opposite to what they probably need. I mean, I work in London, and obviously I'm from London, and what's happening there is where I work in Islington, we're finding, and I work for a welfare charity, is that people are being pushed out and out to places like Peterborough. Well, if you're on a national minimum wage and your job has been in Islington or the City of London, and you're forced to, you know, you're moved to affordable housing up in Peterborough, you're not going to be able to continue to do your job. So you're going to become unemployed. And you're going to create sort of ghettos, aren't we? So rather than creating ghettos of affordable housing in urban areas, we're going to bung them up to the countryside, you know, where it's going to be almost impossible for people on very low incomes to actually do their jobs, because a lot of local jobs are going to be town centre based. They're going to be things like, you know, working in, I mean, industries like our town centre, so leisure and retail and so on. So there's not much use if you work in leisure and retail in Maidstone, pay the national minimum wage, and then all the affordable housing is provided, I don't know, the other extreme end of the borough, you know, because you won't, you know, you'll use your national minimum wage just to actually get the bus, if there is one, or to drive to get from where you've been housed into town. So I think that's a completely wrong concept. Like, we're trying to push the poor indirectly into places into ghettos where they won't be able to work. And I think that's one of the things hopefully in this joint letter we can pull out. And the other thing just about the brownfield sites, and I was just going to quote from my own experience when I was a councillor in Merton. We had a number of brownfield sites in an urban area, but they were picking up, I think, Stephen and Tony's points, really rich in wildlife. There was one which was had been decommissioned about 20 years. It was an old sewage works, but it was actually one of the best areas of wildlife. And our borough includes Wimbledon Common and Mitcham Common, so thousands of acres of pristine common land. But the Wandle Valley sewage site, with its rills and so on, is incredibly rich for wildlife. And there had been a push to develop a couple of thousand houses and flats on it, but myself and the Labour Party, when we took power there, we scrapped that. We said, because despite it being brownfield, its ecological and biodiversity values, to use sort of up-to-date language, was so great that it would be developed as a nature park. And it sits there now as a nature park in a highly built-up urban area, providing people with access to wildlife. And that was on a brownfield site, which my concern is with this policy, if it went through as is now, we would have lost that argument. And in future, we may lose similar arguments, which are to the massive detriment not only of biodiversity and so on, but actually people's experiences of nature and their life opportunities. So I really think you have to be careful when you can't just say all brownfield needs to have bricks and mortar on it, because sometimes it's more valuable being left.
Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. I haven't heard any motions put forward, so the other alternative is to propose recommendation. So I'll ask for a seconder on that. Thank you. Do we all agree? Do we need to take a vote? All those in favour, if you could raise your hands. Thank you. Anyone against? Thank you. No one abstained. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to item 13, the Medway Local Plan 2041, Regulation 18, consultation. So again, over to you, I believe, Councillor Harwood.
I think all I need to say is, you think Maidstone's got it bad, look at Medway's local plan and what they've got to take. But there are big challenges for Maidstone Borough because a lot of it is hard on our boundary. It's very close to the Kent Downs National Landscape, and there are significant implications for our borough arising from this document. So if I hand over to the officers, they can give you a resume of where we are on this.
Thank you very much. So yeah, the document is out for consultation from the 15th of July to the 8th of September. It encompasses within it 89 draft policies across a variation of chapters, and a draft potential policies map, so indicating where potentially the growth could go. The growth is outlined to go up to 2041, as previously mentioned, and the sort of the consultation content is outlined in paragraph 2.8. So just quickly going through that. So vision and strategic objectives, spatial growth options, natural environment, built environment, housing, economic development, retail, town centres, transport, health, communities and infrastructure, mineral supply, waste management and energy. Our proposed response covers various areas outlined in paragraph 2.12. And then in terms of a sort of a resume of those responses, that's outlined in paragraph 2.13. So just for clarity, that is around the council wanted to be reassured that Medway Council is seeking to meet its own housing need. We have various concerns regarding the impact of the proposed growth on the North Downs National Landscape. We also have concerns and require clarity on the spatial strategy and the future of places like Hempstead Valley and the impact that that would have on our own adopted local plan review and sites such as Lidsing. We would also like to see more of the evidence base around infrastructure and transport to support the plan, and also the supporting infrastructure that we've outlined within Lidsing Garden community that goes across our boundary, we'd like to see outlined in Medway's plan. And also we'd like to understand Medway's approach to the duty to cooperate and their strategic matters. And lastly, the environmental impacts need to be considered on the ecology that in that area and protected habitats to the south of the proposed sites in the Capstone Valley.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Russell.
Thank you. I can't see anything specifically here about the duty to cooperate. Do we normally have a bit that says about providing for gypsy and traveller accommodation? I know that was part of our duty to cooperate with Tunbridge and Malling, I think, when we did our one previously. So I just wonder, have we made a comment on that? I can't see that we have, and could we?
Yes, it's in the Appendix 1, we put it under sort of the duty to cooperate paragraph, local housing needs, so sort of captured in that whole first bullet point.
I thought that. So could we make specific reference to it?
Thank you, Chairman. If it's the will of this committee that the response is amended to make reference specifically to gypsies and travellers in addition to overall local housing needs, then obviously officers will incorporate that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion on that, and do we have a seconder? Thank you. Sorry, do we all agree with that amendment? Thank you, thank you. Yep.
If I may, Chairman, we have a duty to cooperate with our neighbouring local authorities, and very often it's in reality quite perfunctory. You know, there is an objection that everybody's putting their development hard on the boundary of the next district or unitary council. Because of the very significant pressure the Medway Council is under to deliver a very large number of new units, what I have discussed with the officers is perhaps going beyond the duty to cooperate, where we actually work with them as closely as we possibly can, because I think we've got shared challenges in relation to the Kent Downs. We've got shared challenges in relation to the growth agenda that we are having to deal with. And Maidstone and Medway are inextricably linked. In some ways, Maidstone is a dormitory and vice versa. If you look at the number of people who work for, say, for big employers like Kent County Council, a number of them actually live in Medway because of the relative property price variance and so on. So I think in addition to our, if you like, formal response, there are also meetings going on and letters being shared to say that we will kind of work closely with you to, so that we can actually kind of help each other out if we can on lessening some of the very significant impacts.
Russell.
Thank you. Councillor Harwood, this is your letter, so presumably you could have put that in had you wanted it, because the previous one went from the previous cabinet member. But happy that if you put in, happy to amend the recommendations provided everybody is, if we put in a sentence that says, whilst we agree that the duty to cooperate doesn't mean that we have a duty to agree, we look forward to working with you as we move forward through your local plan. Something like that, if everyone agrees with that.
Seconder? Do we all agree on that amendment? So if the first amendment, so
should perhaps the cabinet member respond?
So do we all agree that amendment? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So with that amendment, do we agree with the recommendation that it's goes back to the Medway Council? Yeah. Agreed. Thank you. Item 14. I think we're on now. Yes, item 14, Maidstone Local Development Scheme update. Again, that is you, councillor.
I mean, on this one,
We're just having a move around, so.
yeah, the local development scheme essentially is kind of housekeeping, and it needs to be updated in relation to the delivery and forward plan. I bring officers in, they can explain what's changed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the reason why we need a new LDS is to reflect changes within the timetable of the Gypsy and Traveller DPD. And the reason for that is set out in the report. Just to summarise, due to the amount of sites that had to be assessed as part of the existing sites that we have, and then also the outcomes of the GTAA, where we had a need of over 500. In terms of what the changes are, we proposed in our previous LDS, which was adopted last year in February, to have a Reg 18B consultation in February and March of this year. That's now going to take place in October to November of this year. And the update, the reason why we're doing the update is to ensure that Maidstone, as the local planning authority, is meeting their requirements under legislation. And therefore we're proposing that this new LDS is recommended for council for approval. Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you. 600 down to 500. I can see that you've revised that. One of my team asked a specific question about this at full council. Was this on track? And we received the answer, yes, this is on track. And I thought, I think the LDS is going to have to be reviewed. And look, here we are, the LDS is being reviewed, and the Gypsy and Traveller DPD has slipped, and the Regulation 18B consultation has slipped. And whilst not a surprise, we are continuing to not progress the needs assessment for a sector of our community. And I just think, what choice do we have but to accept it? So I'm not saying we should not go with it, because we need to keep progressing this work. But we did ask the question, we were assured this was still on track, and it clearly is not. Thank you.
Any of the officers like to comment?
Yeah, the reason being is because of the change to national policy. We had the NPPF changes at the latter part of last year, and now with the new government in place and the new revised policy that they're working on.
Thank you, Councillor Haywood, sorry, Harper.
Don't worry. I just wanted to ask a quick question. Is it the Design and Sustainability DPD? Is this one of the documents which, when it's eventually approved, will help us in terms of the HMO issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Spooner.
I think I just have a quick question. As a planning authority, we have a lot on our plates with the 2 DPDs, the 3 SPGs. I'd just like to know, at what point in time do we start looking again at reviewing the actual local plan, rolling it forward to, I think it'll be 2043. That'll be, a review of the review. I just want to get some sort of grip on what the timescale for that might be. If someone can answer that, it'd be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pleased to let the committee know that preliminary work is underway by officers to prepare for a new local plan for Maidstone. At this stage, obviously, it is initial work, programme management and so forth. This is being undertaken. Obviously, when we get to the appropriate time and get agreement, we will be moving forward publicly with plenty of notice to ensure that those who wish to be involved can be involved at all the key stages, and we will be updating our local development scheme at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Got no more questions. So The proposal is to recommend it for adoption by the council. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. So do we agree with that proposal? Yeah, thank you. Last item, 15, strategic development sites, supplementary planning document, stakeholders, government group proposals. I'm sure there's something going around about making these titles of these documents as long as possible using the biggest words possible somewhere. Can we, who's going to speak to this then, please?
Yeah, as I say, yeah, about my favourite document, the local plan. I think, yeah, I think we will bring the officers in at this stage, and hopefully you all know where we're going. Just the one thing that I did want to put across was in terms of the councillors identified as taking place, it describes the old ward boundaries. So when it talks about North Ward, that in relation to the parkland at Invicta Park, that actually now will involve the Pendleton Heath and the Ringleston Ward councillors, and where it refers to the Harwich and Lenham, it will now be Harwich and Lenham and North Downs Ward councillors, and where it refers to Boxley Ward, it now, in relation to Lidsing, the councillors involved will be from Boxley Downs Ward. So just to kind of ensure that it's translated into the new structure.
Yeah, Councillor Harper.
It'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall in some.
Oh, sorry. Was you coming, Mark? You coming in?
No, Councillor, it was whether or not you wanted a further introduction from officers or not, and I was just indicating that today we have Jenny Cullen with us online and available on screen to answer any questions and to provide any further detail. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Harper.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall in some of these stakeholder group meetings, I think. I hopefully everybody taking part in them will be doing it in a positive way, because I can see the possibility, given obviously some of the representations on it, especially from the parish councils and some of the borough councillors. I'm thinking most, especially in terms of Lidsing and Heathlands, that these could end up, if we're not careful, being reopening debates which have gone, which were beyond. That these steering groups need to be looking at how we can actually progress these developments. I mean, that's the role now. If they're in the local plan, they're moving forward. And I just would hope that all the people going into it would be entering into that spirit that, we've got this is going to be built. We just got to make sure it's built in the best way, as opposed to going along to these meetings and saying we don't want it built, and therefore these steering groups sort of ending up not achieving a great deal.
Thank you. Jenny, would you like to come back in?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the steering groups have been set up as part of a requirement to carry out informal engagement on the SPDs. So these groups really are to ensure that we are keeping members updated and informed on the progress of them, as well as providing opportunities to provide feedback on draft versions and perhaps evidence-based documents depending on the topic area. We have terms of reference set out at the end of the list of attendees, and these clearly explain what the groups will be used for. We would be welcome the groups to provide a steer, help us inform discussions, and resolve critical issues that may arise.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions?
Hi. obviously I looked at the list of the members, proposed members of the steering group, and I'm thinking my ward, High Street ward in Victor Park Barracks, is next to it. We've got lots of vibrant teenagers, people with disabilities, really diverse population in the town centre. I'm looking at the list of people that potentially be invited to feedback on this, and I don't see a particularly diverse list of people that will be turning up to give feedback. How will the public be involved with this steering group? How will they be able to feed into it?
So the steering group is purposely set up for sort of this kind of director level and political level involvement. We propose to have separate informal engagement exercises with members of the community, local residents, and we're in the process of producing a consultation and engagement strategy that will set out various methods of engaging different members of the community, including younger people.
Thank you. So no further questions or speakers. So going to the recommendations on page 149. Can I have a seconder for those recommendations? Thank you. Do we all agree the recommendations? Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the evening, and a nice pleasant one it was too. I wish you all a good rest of the evening, and thank you very much for attending, and I now formally close the meeting. Thank you. And thank you very much for your notes and your hard work.
Yeah, sorry, I know I couldn't put together the officers, there's too many.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that, yeah. Yes.
Each page, and the last page to put a signature, the full signature. Yeah. Oh, yes, it's just back there.
There you go. There, put them there, pick them up, I think, I moved them.